There's a place I have found in the shade on the ground, far from all worries and troubling sound. When I go there to be by myself, only me, no one can guess what I came there to see. There's a sun in the sky, there's a cloud drifting by, all kinds of birds make you wish you could fly. And in the distance I see someone waving at me. I hope that it's you, but who else could it be? I should probably turn myself on if we're going to do a stream this morning. Hey, how's everybody doing? Whoops, there we go. Little technical difficulty. It's Monday morning here at the Untold Studios, and we are having a good day. It was a great weekend this weekend. I'm excited. Going to be joined by Brian King Sharp, one of my co-hosts here on Untold. And let me pull him in here. Hey, Brian, how are you this morning?
I'm good, Jeff. I'm glad that you're not the only one having technical difficulties. I'm doing the same thing on my end. You got the Monday morning blues.
Well, typically my other show that I do, Pine Island Research, most of it is interview style. This show, it's like I got like 18 tabs open at once on things we want to talk about, pushing buttons, stuff's disappearing. So, and unlike Doug, I don't have an Alex to kind of run the production for me.
Yeah, we both need producers to help produce the show, I guess. We need our own Alex.
Yeah. Jen's in chat. She says, nice haircut. I did get a haircut. So my hair was probably the longest it's been since I've gotten out of the military. I mean, it was my front bangs went down to my mouth, and the sides, if you pulled them straight out. I got my hair cut. I was looking at the floor. I was like, man, we could donate this to Locks of Love. There's so much hair coming off my head. But my oldest son graduated this weekend, and I knew there'd be a bunch of relatives taking pictures. So I figured I better make myself presentable. So
there you go.
Plus things are warming up here finally. So, you don't really need the Big Lebowski type haircut in the summertime. So how was your weekend?
It was busy, man. I'm coming off of a week of vacation. We went up to Nashville and spent a week. And like I was telling you before we went on, I need a week to recover because I'm back in the saddle this morning. I actually did an interview on Saturday, but it was kind of still, I was in vacation mode during the interview, but now it's back to rubber meeting the road and emails, and it's a lot, but it was a good weekend. It was fun.
Yeah, it always seems to me like if you're going to take a 7-day vacation, you got to take 10 days off because you need that 48 hours to get everything washed, put away, sleep a little bit, eat normal, get reacclimated back to home. But especially if you end up flying anywhere, boy, that really can kind of mess it up a little bit.
Yeah, we drove the truck with 3 dogs, and one of our dogs gets car sick, and it was a thing. It was interesting. 5.5 hours in the truck with anybody, and then you add 3 dogs to the mix. It's definitely an interesting trip.
Yeah. Well, Friday, like I said, my oldest graduated, and we had his graduation party Saturday. Friday, I took the whole day, fired up the smoker, made like 3 pork butts in the smoker, which it made me realize that there are certain smells in this world that for men, for guys at least, it's like an aphrodisiac, man. When you fire up a smoker and those hickory chips are in the air and the meat's cooking,
it's like if you could bottle that up and make it into a cologne. I mean, I don't know how many women you'd attract. Maybe you wouldn't attract any of them. I don't know. But the other smell that kind of when I started thinking about that is every spring when we get the boat docks out and we've got a bigger fishing boat that we have on a boat lift, but I have a smaller boat too that I use just to access some of these smaller lakes. And you take a little 25 horse outboard motor and fire it up, that two-stroke smoke in the air is like an aphrodisiac for it's just like summer's here again, you know.
I think we need to get with a scentologist, and you just name the cologne, Two-Stroke Smoke by
Yeah.
Jeff Harding.
Yeah. It will be my signature brand out there. There are guys out there that get it. I know if there maybe there's some that don't, and maybe most of the women they're like, I don't get it, but I don't know. Anyways, appreciate everybody coming in to chat and joining us this morning. Starting your Monday out with us. I'm gonna quick play our. Let me pull this up. I'm going to quick play this, get it out of the way, and we'll start talking about some of the things in the news and some different subjects me and you are going to chat about this morning. So,
show your support for the Untold Radio Network family of shows and join in on the conversation by using super stickers and super chats on YouTube. Got a question you want answered? Ask it live via a super chat and get real-time responses from our show's knowledgeable hosts and guests. Help keep the Untold Radio Network shows running strong. We need your support. Send your super chats and stickers now.
So yeah, one of the another thing we should talk about is I'll get some info up on that here in a minute. So I was looking at some of these videos this morning. I get these videos in my feed, and I didn't realize this was a thing. Maybe there's some people listening on podcast or here in chat that is familiar with this, but there's some TikTok channels that are pretty big that have pets. Most of them are dogs that use these talk buttons. This is a system of like 20 buttons that you can program. I could push a button and record my name and my wife's name or my son's names so that each button has a name. And then the other buttons can be anything like, stranger or whatever. And not all dogs can do this, obviously, but there are some pets that communicate by they learn what these buttons are, which I kind of get because there are certain words that I'll say that even our cat will snap its head and look at me. It's like they know that word, right? And but evidently there's some TikTok channels where they have these influencers have a pet that everybody gets to know this pet on these channels, and they use these talk buttons. Well, this lady's one of them, and she has 3 cats, and 2 of the cats evidently aren't good at this. They don't know how to use it, but one of them's really good at it. And these cats are indoor-outdoor cats, and they were on her porch the night before, and 2 coyotes came through the yard. And this cat the next day is using this thing to tell her everything. I mean, she saw it, but it's like reliving the experience. And I thought I really found this entertaining because I didn't even, like I said, I didn't even know these talk button things existed. But have you ever seen these or heard of these?
No, I'm taking notes I've got to do some live stuff on TikTok at some point in time this week. I'm definitely going to check that out. It sounds very interesting for sure.
I haven't looked into it either other than this one video. So let's get this up. So here's a picture of this talk button here, these talk buttons, and each button says something different. So let me play it here.
Last night, 2 coyotes tried to attack my cats while they were on the catio. Justin was inside when it happened, and I
Her
assumed he was
cat's
asleep.
name is
But
Justin.
today he said this.
Stranger. Justin. Stranger. Stranger. Mom. Stranger. There's a stranger dog last night. Did you see him? Mom. Yes. Stranger. Yes. There was a stranger outside. Yes. Stranger. Dog. Outside. Yes. There was a stranger dog outside. Yes. He was very mean. He tried to eat you guys.
It's still on Justin's mind, and about an hour later, he comes by again and says this.
Dog.
You can see he's on high alert and looking towards both of the windows that face the yard. At least until I come around the corner.
Yes. Yes.
So yeah, I mean, what's interesting is where the stranger and the dog button is and the mom button is, the outside button is way over on the other end of this thing with a bunch of buttons around that. And it seems to know which buttons it's hitting to try to communicate this thought that it's having. So I'm interested in doing some more research. They say mostly it's dogs that use these because they have a more different way of thinking and you don't see this much with cats, but there's some dogs out there that I guess have whole conversations with their owners using these things. So
That looks like a rabbit hole you could go down for a couple of hours and get lost on TikTok.
oh man, I tell you what, that would be interesting. Let's see what else I have up here that I was gonna mention. Oh, let's pull that up. I seen this on a national story, and then I also seen our local news talking about it. The oldest dog in the world. Now, this dog was the oldest dog at the time that was alive. It was 30 years and 200 and some days. And just the other day, it became the oldest dog in history. It's actually beat all the other records, but it's 31 years old. And that kind of blows me away. I had two labs that I had a chocolate lab, and out of her second litter of puppies, I kept one of the yellow labs that she had. So I had a chocolate lab. She lived to be 17 years old. And when she died, my yellow lab was 13 years old. And literally like a week after she had passed away, he passed away. I think he passed away of a broken heart because he was alone at that time. But he was pretty old at 13 still. But 17 was pretty darn old for a bigger dog. It really blows me away that this dog is 31 years old.
Yeah, I'd definitely like to know what they're feeding it.
Yeah. Most dogs, when they get pretty old and start suffering from that stuff, putting weight on their legs and moving around well doesn't seem to be something they're easily capable of. And yet they're saying this dog is mobile and it can walk around, and kind of blows me away. I'm wondering, anybody in chat, if you've ever had a dog or a pet that got pretty old, that go ahead and let us know. I'd be interested in finding out, because it just, I've never heard of a dog being over 20 years old, let alone 30, 31 years old.
Yeah, I haven't either. Derek said he had a cat that lived to be 19.
Oh, wow. Well, I think our current cat, we got that cat when my oldest son was 2 years old, and he just turned 19. So that cat's got to be about 16 and a half, 17 years old, I'm pretty sure. And she seems pretty healthy. Geez, of course, she gets spoiled more than anything I've ever seen. So, another interesting, sometimes I read these stories, the science stuff, and I start wondering, are they really looking at the whole picture? And this is one of them. This is a study that reveals the surprising superpower of Americans' bison population. And they're talking about a recent study out of Kansas State University has found that reintroducing bison to ecosystems more than doubles plant diversity and richness, leading to lands that are more resistant to droughts. And so they paint this great picture of this, but I don't know if they're really aware that, up in my home state of South Dakota, if you look at, and they acknowledge this in the article, that, big open prairie land that's owned by these ranchers that they put cattle on, that's kind of the same thing with cattle, but not to this same degree. They're saying that bison, this is like 100% more natural plant rejuvenation and things like that than even when you have cattle on those properties. The problem is what they don't mention is that if you reintroduce bison into an ecosystem, meaning not for livestock and fenced in, but like into state parks and things like that, they don't understand the way fences work. And I don't, this just seems like a really dangerous, non-positive side to this idea that they don't even mention that in this article. They're just acting like we've got to do this, When they filmed Dances with Wolves, they did that in the state of South Dakota, north of the middle of the state in Pierre. And the guy who owned the land was a friend of my father's. His name was Bill Houck. And he had the nation's biggest buffalo herd on his property. And when I say property, he had like 1,000 acres out there. But the reason why they filmed Dances with Wolves there is when you looked at the landscape there, you didn't see power lines or anything that would give you, it would blow the whole setting of the movie, unless you digitally removed it. But he'll tell you the fences he builds look like a border crossing fence. I mean, to keep these buffalo in, because a barbed wire fence, they'll run right through that. They don't even see it there. They certainly can't jump over them like other wildlife, elk and deer and stuff. So I just found that interesting, that article saying, oh, we should reintroduce bison into the ecosystem. Do you have anybody that ranch bison or has bison around your area, Brian?
We've passed a couple of places where I've seen some bison, but there's very few and far between. There's not a ton of that now.
Well, I go out to Sturgis about every other year out in South Dakota. And a couple of years ago, people go ride through Custer State Park and where these bison herds are, and they're big herds, and they're on free roaming land all over. And every year you'll be riding down Needles Highway or something, or heading out to Devil's Tower on the Wyoming border, and you'll see bison along a highway, and they'll be like 200-300 cycles pulled over because everybody wants to take pictures of them if they can see them close. And of course, the infamous day when a couple pulled over and one woman who must not be able to really calculate in her head risk versus reward walked up very, very, like 10 feet away from one of these bison to take its picture. And it hooked her with its horn, tore her pants off, and the pants were hanging off of one of its horns, and it stayed hanging off her horn as she laid there in her underwear unconscious. And everybody's trying to distract these buffalo so they can save her life. She got thrown about 15-20 feet into the air and landed head first onto the pavement. And now the governor of South Dakota, Kristi Noem, she had a sign put up out there in this location that says, "Don't pet the fluffy cows." as a joke, but I mean, it seems like every year during Sturgis, somebody tries to get too close to these things with a camera, you know?
I read those signs, and every time you read a sign like that, it's like having the hot coffee thing on the McDonald's coffee cup. Do you really have to put that on there? But clearly you do, because we used to talk about it when I was a cop. You know, if we got a new SOP, a new standard operating procedure that came out, it meant somebody did something stupid.
Yeah.
Right. You get a new SOP to tell you not to do whatever the other guy just did. So, wow.
Yeah, no kidding. Just looking at some of the stuff. No, this is not pre-recorded, Gary. We are live right now. The way this works on Coffee Time is we do a live show Monday mornings, 11:30 Eastern, 10:30 Central. And about an hour after the show, it'll get uploaded to all the podcast platforms out there. So in the afternoon or tomorrow morning, we'll have quite a few listeners listening to it on podcast. So here's another. This is every now and then you see a story that's so stupid you almost have to share it. But evidently, new details about the mysterious pile of 500 pounds of cooked spaghetti that was found in New Jersey, out in the middle of nowhere. They're trying to figure out how it got there. A New Jersey town is steeped in mystery as 500 pounds of cooked pasta was inexplicably dumped in a wooded area. Heaps of noodles lined a creek bed in Old Bridge Township, and nobody knows where it came from. The mess has since been cleaned up, but social media is buzzing about the puzzling sauceless noodles conundrum. So, I mean, I've heard the term the flying spaghetti monster when people are, use that rhetorically when talk about Sasquatch and can they fly UFOs and stuff. And then they say, well, geez, the flying spaghetti monster, right? I know Pat used to say that a lot, but
Derek just put it in the comments. Must have been Pat Turner's flying spaghetti monster.
Yep.
And just the fact that social media is buzzing about this pile of spaghetti says a lot about social media and people in general. I think there's probably some better things for people to be concentrating on than a big pile of spaghetti. But we're talking about it too, so there you go.
I would imagine this story's probably got so many clicks just because you read the caption, you're like, what? But I will say this, if I won the lottery, if I was rich, I might have fun playing. I might get a plane just to fly around and dump 500 pounds of pasta in the middle of a forest, thinking, eventually somebody's going to find this and be like, huh? Weird stuff like that. See how many headlines you can create by doing weird stuff. If you had the money, it would be a fun little research project to see how many heads you could turn with some of this stuff. But
it's definitely good clickbait for sure.
Yeah. I'm just looking to see what else I had. So here's every now and then I run into some of these archaeology sites. They're talking about this monster snake that was 5 times larger than an anaconda. In 2009, it was discovered the remains of a monster snake in a mine shaft in Colombia. To date, the fossils were represented the largest known snake ever. The extinct Titanoboa, that's a heck of a name, Titanoboa, would have been around 4 stories tall and weighed over a ton. Titanoboa lived between 58 million and 60 million years ago, which is crazy that they found the remains of this in a cave if it's that old. But here's a depiction on what it would, size-wise, what it would be. Thank God these things went extinct, huh?
Yeah, we definitely not want to meet that on a path.
It said that it would reach lengths of 40 to 50 feet and weighed over 2,500 pounds.
Wow.
I don't like normal size snakes. I don't know. I can't imagine living in a time that would have snakes that big. That would be something.
Mm.
What do you are snakes one of your things on your list that just doesn't work for you, or are you comfortable around snakes? Some people are pretty comfortable with them.
I'm comfortable I've had snakes as pets. I had a Burmese python at one point that was like 12 feet when I sold it. I had to move and I couldn't carry it with me. So I sold it to a guy. This thing was 12 feet and, pretty big in diameter. I mean, it could swallow like a rabbit or a small dog with no problem. And I'm okay with those kind of snakes, but I was on the path just walking the dogs a couple of days ago when we got back from vacation, and it was a nice sunny spot in the woods where we walk, and there was some sun coming through, and there was like a black snake that was curled up, maybe 6 feet long, and it scared the crap out of me. It's just that immediate reaction. You catch a snake out of the corner of your eye, and it's your reptilian brain goes into full fight or flight mode when you see a snake, because we're just like all animals. We're programmed to do that, right? We're supposed to avoid snakes, but in general, they don't really, it's not one of those things that I have a huge fear of. But yeah, I'm definitely, when we walk out here at night, I used to take night hikes a lot, but I don't do that as much in the summer, especially because we have, copperheads and other things that come out and they're around at night. So I don't like to play with that for sure.
Yeah, we don't, when it comes to poisonous snakes here, we've got diamondback rattlesnakes. We don't really have copperheads here. I know when I lived down in Georgia, when I was in the military, Georgia, the Carolinas, there's a whole different slew of snakes to be careful. But up here, most of the snakes are garter snakes and bull snakes. And then there's a few, these fox snakes and different ones like that. But I had a kind of a weird, I have a fear of snakes. I mean, I hate to say it. When I go through the list of stuff that really scares me, it's not like I run or scream. It's just, I have to be prepared if I'm going to be around a snake. I have to go through a little mental stuff. And I had on my riding mower, the belt last year, the belt came off of it one day when I was out mowing the yard, and I stopped and turned the mower off and get underneath it, messing with the deck and get the belt back on it. And I went a little bit further and it came off again. So I was frustrated with this. And my wife walked out in the yard and she sees me laying under the mower and she says, "What are you doing?" And I says, "The belt keeps coming off of this. I don't know why." So I'm laying there on my back with my arms both tangled up under this thing. It's pretty cramped. And as I'm working on this, my wife yells, "Snake," and takes off running. Of course, I levitate about 3 feet off the ground with my arms tangled into the mower, trying to get my feet under me. And I run away and I'm like, what is, I about had a heart attack. I said, "What are you doing?" And it was a little garter snake. And I said, "You can't yell snake and run away like that. You got to give me some details. Like, is it 2 inches from my ear, or is it 5 feet away? Is it big, small? You don't just yell snake and run away." I mean,
I thought you were going to say it was because of the belt laying on the ground and it wasn't even a snake.
No.
That would have been even better.
I told her, show some respect and let me know if I'm at least an inch from losing my life, or do I have time to get my feet under me, Afterwards, it's funny. You can laugh about it. But in the moment, I think my heart was about to seize up, because like I say, I could hold the snake. I just need to go through like 3 minutes of mental preparation. I'm one of those guys. Other people, I think that it's kind of interesting when you hear what people's fears are. They're afraid of spiders, or they're afraid of whatever, But yeah, there really isn't, when it comes to animals, insects and stuff, I don't really get bothered by much, but snakes are just like, I don't know.
Derek says, "Come to Ireland, Jeff. There's no snakes over there."
Yeah.
What's up, Todd Neese? Long time no see, man. He's in the chat.
Yeah, Todd's
Uncle
been
Bones.
throwing up some pictures on Facebook of some interesting places he's been lately. I've enjoyed them. Thanks for sharing them, Todd. One of the other things I was going to talk about, and this was a pretty interesting article. Now, I don't want anybody to get confused and think that because I do some work trying to figure out the truths and some answers as it pertains to Sasquatch, that I am declaring that there's any relation to Neanderthals or a theory of Neanderthal, anything. But this was an article that about Neanderthals and how, when they existed and how they walked the earth with Homo sapiens, and it talks about Neanderthals or Homo neanderthals existed on Earth in the late, of course, I'm going to butcher some of these words, Pleistocene age. They were a species of early human that some may not know actually walked the Earth alongside modern humans. DNA suggests that the species split from one another more than 300,000 years ago, and Neanderthals continued to live in Eurasia up until 40,000 years ago. And there's some interesting connections that they talk about here. Which here's one thing I noticed. On the article about them, they have a picture of a plastic Bigfoot. Okay, I mean, they're talking about how Neanderthals, their arms are shorter to their body size than humans, and yet they're showing a Bigfoot that has arms down to its knees in this picture. I don't know. But due to the Neanderthal stockier build and shorter limbs, they were originally classified as ape-like creatures and monsters by early researchers in the 1900s. This was the time in which they were stereotyped as being slumping barbarians. People began to associate barbaric qualities with cavemen and early humans, which led to their portrayal as monsters and antagonists in horror films. It says, though Neanderthals are an ancestor to modern man, they actually have a closer relative in the Denisova people. The Denisovans are named after the cave in Siberia where their DNA was discovered in 2010. It was extracted from a finger bone of a teenage female who died around 195,000 years ago. It says, unlike their cousins Homo sapiens and Homo erectus, who lived in Africa and Southeast Asia, Neanderthal remains have mainly been found in Western Europe. Their name comes from the German Neander Valley, where their remains were found in 1856. Their migration patterns were directed by weather and availability of food. It goes on to say the reason they died out, Neanderthals lived in a harsh world where 80% died before the age of 40. And their population numbers were low. Because of this, they suffered from the effects of inbreeding. Due to the lack of genetic diversity and the influence of detrimental traits, the Neanderthal species numbers dwindled and they eventually disappeared altogether. Their build was pretty different from modern humans. It says that males averaged around 5'4" and females averaged around 5 foot. But in this diagram, you can actually see the difference in, and I don't know when you find fossils how you can, I know you can check, tell the size and stuff, but as far as organ layout and stuff, you'd have to find a pretty well preserved frozen one, I think, to be able to determine that. But you see the size difference in the heads between humans and Neanderthals. They say they didn't have tiny brains. It's quite the opposite. On average, they had larger brains than their modern day counterparts and were most likely capable of some spoken language. They also probably had better night vision than we do based on the size of their eye sockets and the part of the brain that processes sight. Um, some of them were redheads. They say, they're all depicted as having black hair, but where some of these remains are found, they can tell that due to lack of light and sunlight in certain climates, shorter days, colder weather, they likely had lighter skin and red hair. Let's see here. They were considered an alpha predator at the time they were alive, but they still face a lot of danger just to survive. Nearly all of the discovered specimens to this date show some signs of injury or trauma. For many of them, it was the cause of their death. They know that they lived in family units. It appears from their skeletons that young children were most likely put to work early, which stunted their growth and often led to injury. They organized themselves socially. A thriving population of Neanderthals would consist of up to 50 family units and would interact together, likely sharing duties such as hunting and trading. Men, women, and even kids were entrusted with hunting. This was perhaps less productive on the whole, as it didn't account for different talents or capabilities. However, it meant everyone shared the same basic survival skills. This is interesting. They were carnivores. Modern humans are carnivorous, and we often think of ancient peoples as being exactly the same. Hunter-gatherers who ate what plants they could find while supplementing it with animal protein. However, nearly all of Neanderthals' diet consisted of meat, which they hunted from animals like mammoths, boars, and ancient cattle called oryx. And this is interesting too. They had cooking skills. So historical evidence shows that once Neanderthals obtained food, they knew how to cook it in a number of unexpected complex ways. They knew how to make fires and could roast, boil, and even smoke meats. They also occasionally used plants and herbs to add flavor and variety to their cooking. Now, I'm just going to assume that when they find these remains in caves and stuff, they're finding, packets with, like pouches with herbs or something. I don't know how you would draw that conclusion unless they must have some type of evidence to show that. They had fierce competition. Neanderthals weren't the only predators roaming the ancient hills and valleys of Western Europe. They fought for territory with many different creatures. Other carnivores like wolves, bears, and even cave lions. But I thought it was interesting when they start talking about art and culture, that many of these drawings in these caves, they believe were actually made by Neanderthals. They use specialized tools. They found these tools with these remains, as far as spears and things like that. Their techniques are still used today. We think of early human technology being extremely primitive and outdated in our era of highly advanced electronics and the internet. However, some of the tools have stuck around, and they're showing kind of how they prepare animal skins for preservation and stuff. But and then they said they honored their dead, that it appears that that some of these bodies are actually in the substrates that they find them in are actually laid out like they've been buried there. It wasn't just a mass of bodies strewn all over. So yeah, it's pretty interesting, this article was. I might post it in the comments if people want to go back and look at it, just because like I say, I'm not trying to draw any relation to Sasquatch or what slot what fits in or anything like that. I just thought it was interesting that when you think of Neanderthals, you know, when you think of could they build fire, could they cook meat, you know, things like that. Really, all I knew was what you've seen depicted in movies, and you don't know how much of that is made up and how much isn't. So to see science kind of lay this out as far as what they were capable of, it's pretty interesting.
Yeah, I'm glad you brought it up because a lot of people don't realize how long they existed, and they did exist side by side with modern humans because a lot of us are walking around today with Neanderthal DNA in our systems because they bred with modern humans. So, and there's a story I was trying to poke around and find it on the internet. I may post it on some of the social media stuff on Sasquatch Odyssey or whatever later, but there is a story that I read a while back about a cave where some of these things were believed to be a leftover group of Neanderthals in Russia, I believe it was. And they went in and basically shut them up in a cave and burned them all to death because they were scared of them because people were claiming that they were coming out and doing whatever they were doing. But they were believed to be some leftover Neanderthals. And this was in the early 1930s, I believe. So pretty interesting story.
That is interesting. Yeah, I've actually been kind of looking at some of the stuff that I don't know why my camera has to keep freezing up here, but some of the stuff that gets shared on your one of your Facebook pages, and it's pretty interesting what people are sharing on there. I run across different stories from people, different links. Somebody had shared the other day a picture of a baby Sasquatch or a video. I guess it's a video. It's a video link. And I don't know. There weren't that many people who have viewed the YouTube video. I mean, there's only 400 or 500 people. It wasn't something that's gone viral or anything. But it certainly didn't. I mean, if I'm being honest, there's a lot of pareidolia type look to it. I mean, it is what they can call or claim to be a juvenile Sasquatch. It's dark in color in the background. You can see on its left shoulder that, or what they're suggesting is a shoulder, appears to be in front of a small tree that's behind it because you can see that outline. But that is really the only thing that makes it feel alive, you know, when you look at it, is the suggestion that if this is standing up and that's a shoulder, it's in front of that tree, not behind it, not just black space behind it. But there certainly isn't any movement in the video, and there isn't any definition within the black here that made me look at it and say, oh, that definitely looks like a Sasquatch, you know. And you see that stuff shared all over. It gets shared on one of my pages too. I mean, people will put it up, and I don't know if I want to take it down and crush people's feelings, but certainly I don't want to. I mean, if something's misleading, I got to get rid of it. But yet, if somebody's just saying, hey, here's a video, I don't know what it is, it's just data for you to consider too, take a look. I'm not going to take that down, even if I look at it and say, I don't think that has any conclusive evidence of anything. But when somebody puts it up and they're like, this is definitely what, you know, then you start wondering, okay, wait a minute here. So, and
yeah,
you
had, it bothers me to no end when people start making definitive statements about anything related to Sasquatch or Dogman or any cryptid, frankly, because you don't know. And there's so much pareidolia that goes around. I just shake my head. I mean, I get it in some of the Sasquatch Odyssey fans group on Facebook. There's about 3,000 members in there, and people share stuff all the time. And I encourage that. I enjoy that. Like you said, if it's something that could be considered data, hey, just take a look at this. What do you think? But when it's definite and they're doing that red circle squatch or the outline, it just, come on. I don't know.
Well, so you had shared a link with me, and this is is interesting. There's a couple interesting aspects to what you shared with me. It's a story. It's an interview with the person who wrote this story. Had interviewed somebody, and quite honestly, when I read this whole thing, it seems like I've talked to this guy before. I've seen him interviewed before. The way he describes everything seems like I've heard this before. And that name, actually, they only have his first name in it, which is a little perplexing to me. I mean, if I'm going to be interviewed by a newspaper or an online media source, if they just called me Jeff and that's it, I would think, well, what? This isn't really being portrayed well. I mean, how are other people going to digest something if I'm not willing to give you my last name, but I make all these factual statements in this article, you know? And that's which leads us into the second part of where this is a little, I don't know, is the actual claims this guy makes. But let me pull it up, because you felt the same way, didn't you? That man, this guy's talking about stuff like it's concrete and resolute, you know?
Yeah, I mean, I was immediately drawn to the article. That's why I clicked on it. And then almost immediately it says he's trying to avoid the ridicule and whatnot, but he's been doing his research over the last couple of years, and he immediately starts making definitive statements. And I kept reading it, but, you know, mentally I sort of checked out.
Kisatchie National Forest, no matter where Claude goes, he can sense when there are Sasquatch around. He wasn't conscious of it earlier in his life when he was busy working or raising a family, but even then, he always knew Sasquatches existed. I don't really have a problem with this article yet. Actually, I read quite a bit of this article and didn't have. I just thought, this is interesting. I'm glad this guy's sharing this. But he gets into like, and this is what's weird, is this is on a social media platform called Town Talk, where this isn't a Sasquatch corner of the room. I mean, this is actually a site where a lot of people go to share stuff they're selling or events happening in this area and things like that for wherever this is. But he starts talking about how he mind speaks with them and how intelligent they are. And they have a strict code of conduct. I was walking through the woods one day and this voice says, "Don't come in here." I heard it just as clear as in my head as you and I are talking, he tells the interviewer. A female was in a thicket nursing her young. A private place for her, a safe place, he said. So he complied and went another way. Several months later, Claude communicated with her again, telepathically. He communicated with him before. She said, because your mind is too busy. From the time humans wake up until the time they go to sleep at night, their minds are constantly in motion, she told him. You wake up thinking about what you didn't do yesterday, what you need to do today, and it just snowballs. It gets us. We don't do that. We don't have to. How would Sasquatch have any idea of what I had to do yesterday or what I may have to do today? I mean, this interview gets crazier and crazier as you go, because I don't have a problem listening to people or even having a conversation about telepathy or mind speak. I have no evidence that they can do that or anything can do that. But if somebody said, hey, I'm looking for an explanation of how this would be possible, and they throw that out there as an explanation, I'll include it in the conversation. I'm probably going to discount it in the end because of the lack of evidence, but I'm not going to light somebody on fire because they bring up an idea that maybe they're capable of it. But when you start factually talking about how they are capable of it, and here's all the stuff they told me, that's where it gets a little crazy. What are your thoughts on that, Brian? I mean,
yeah, I definitely have a hard time with that. And here's the thing, if you're interacting with these things and you're having all of these different encounters with them, I say it all the time. It's one thing to have an anecdotal story and come on my show or your show or any show or any platform really and share your encounter. That's one thing. But when you start making definitive statements and you're talking about having multiple encounters over the course of years, and you're spewing all of these facts, quote unquote facts, about what they eat, where they're at, what they can do, their physical appearance. Well, okay, fine. Where's the documentation? Just show some evidence. Where's some pictures? Where's some cast of footprints? Where is some video? Where's some audio that you recorded of these things vocalizing? There's nothing. And yet we're supposed to just read all of this and just take it at face value and say, oh, well, Claude's got it all figured out. They're fallen angels from the Bible and they can mind speak. And there's this female who nurses in the middle of this opening every day, and she knows what my day was like, but yet I have no proof whatsoever except for what I'm telling you in this article. I just don't buy it.
He goes on to factually describe what they look like, what they eat, what their existence is like, where do they live. And that's interesting because one of the things is they only live in areas with hardwoods and not pine forests because pine forests don't have enough resources. I'm like, well, I don't think he's ever been to a pine forest before.
I was about to say, have you ever been to the state of Georgia?
What signs do Sasquatches use? They have mental capability and spiritual powers. Do they need anything from humans? This is the conclusion of the article. He says that she told him, from you, peace. That's it. She told him that Sasquatches don't want what humans have because what humans had to sacrifice to get it, personal freedom. They just want to share the planet with us. That's it. Give them room to live their lives and they'll do the same for us, she said. And I just, here's where my main problem with this is. When I share my encounter that I had when I was 18 years old, this was back in 1987. I couldn't have taken a video of it if I wanted to. There wasn't smartphones and things like that. You know, I didn't have a mechanical camera with me. And so, you know, when somebody says, well, do you have proof of your encounter? I don't. This guy here is making all these factual claims and he doesn't have proof of any of them either. So that means me and him are thrown into the same category. I mean, that's uncomfortable because I share with people what I perceived and what happened to me and what I experienced, but I don't try to make factual claims and say they do this all the time. I have no evidence of any of that. And if you're properly applying the scientific method, this guy has he's doing this community a disservice by making these claims so factually, isn't he?
Yeah, I definitely agree. And I've said it so many times on my show. I try to avoid anybody who says anything definitively outside of I definitively saw one of these creatures. And you can take that for what it's worth and believe it or not. But I agree. When you have stories like this that come out in a reputable situation, it's not just some Bigfoot group where somebody's sharing this on Facebook. Somebody sit down and interviewed this guy and wrote an article about it, and they put it out there for people to digest. And that's fine.
And who most of them aren't in this community or knows anything about the community or have even thought about, could this thing be real? And yet they're reading this whole Sasquatch 101 article as if this is to be taken to heart as, fact.
And I think therein lies the big problem that I have with stuff like that is that's exactly what happens. People are going to click this and they're going to see this guy making all these claims and they're either going to say, oh, wow, Sasquatch is real and they can do all this. That's great. Or I think it's going to go to the other extreme, and most people are going to read that and just roll their eyes like I did when I read it and say, this guy is absolutely full of crap.
Yeah.
He has no idea what he's talking about. And that's why we don't take this subject very seriously, because of crackpots who get into these interview situations and they just start spewing things that they have no proof of whatsoever. Now, again, this guy could have experienced everything that's in the article. He could be telling the truth 100%, and we'll never know. But I think you have to be very careful with making those definitive statements if you don't have proof to back it up. It's just that simple.
There needs to be a prerequisite there. I mean, if he was to say, hey, look, I'm going to share with you what I've noticed through my experience, right? It's just data for you to consider. You're certainly welcome to put a thumbs up or a thumbs down. I'm just sharing with you what I've noticed, and that's it. And he goes on to say all that. I don't have a problem with it. But when you come out and say, let me tell you about what they eat and where they go and where they don't go and what they've told me through MindSpeak and all this stuff, you bring up an interesting point, is when somebody reads an article like this and they say, this guy's nuts. The next time somebody comes along who's had a legitimate encounter and says, and not saying that his wasn't a legitimate encounter, but the next person that comes along and simply says the word Sasquatch, they're lighting you on fire before you even start saying anything.
Yeah, and it's all about semantics, like you said. If you come out and say, this is my experience, this is what I believe to be true, that's a whole nother conversation. But when you start doing definitives, I know because they told me, or I know because this is a fact, you kind of lose me there, because facts require proof, right?
Yeah. I was just reading what some of the folks were talking about in chat. And I don't, like I say, they don't say Claude's last name in this article, but like I say, I've heard of this guy before. I think I've heard him say he really, especially with the MindSpeak, saying what she's told him and all this stuff. I've heard this before, and I'm horrible at drawing that connection and saying, oh, it was on such and such a show 3.5 years ago. I heard. I suck at that, but I'm sure there's people in chat who know who this guy is and whatnot. And like I say, I think it's very important that we restate that I don't have a problem with him sharing an encounter. It just because it hasn't happened to me doesn't mean that it hasn't happened to somebody else. And I am very open-minded to that. It's it's the fact that I don't mind him sharing the MindSpeak on what this thing has said to him and things like that. But when he starts saying they're only in hardwoods, they're not in pine forests, this is what they eat, this is what they don't eat. There's no scientific data that he has collected or anybody else has collected. And if he's collected, he certainly hasn't presented it, that supports what he's claiming. And a simple prerequisite all it would take is, I'm not presenting this as fact. I'm telling you, this is what I've experienced and what I've come to notice over the years. I can't tear his article apart then. I really can't. I mean, he's just simply, even whether or not I believe him or don't believe him, I can't really crucify him over it, because he said I have no scientific data to prove this. I'm just sharing with you what I experienced and what I've noticed, Yeah,
and what does that do for all the people that read that article that have seen a Sasquatch or had an encounter in a pine forest? Well, does that diminish their encounter? Does that mean everybody's a liar? It's just, like I said, I think it's crap to go on and talk about. I'd love to get the guy on the show. So if anybody knows who he is and want to email me, Brian@paranormalworldproductions.com, I'd love to have him on and have a conversation about it, because I don't think the article goes deep enough into where all this comes from. I'd like to get into that. Like, how did this happen? How is this unfolding? What's the time frame on when this stuff came to you and how you got this information? And what are you doing to employ the scientific method in your research to make this repeatable over multiple different times to say, okay, here's something that I can present as fact. I'd love to have that conversation.
And to be fair, I'm not going to say that whoever did this interview and put this up for publication did not manipulate it. And I'm not saying changed what he said, but he could have made a prerequisite that said that I'm not presenting this as fact or scientifically proven. I'm just sharing with you what I've experienced. And he goes on to do all that. And they conveniently leave that part out because from the sensational aspect, we want everybody to think this guy's the Indiana Jones of Sasquatch research, right? And so I don't want to say that he's not being portrayed as trying to be more factual than maybe he was trying to be, but certainly comes off as that. And, to some degree, I think there's a lot of channels out there, Brian, that when you watch people talk about Sasquatch or research or experiences, they're guilty of presenting it from a factual nature too. It's just this guy is probably the most extreme example of it. But there's a lot of people who do that.
Yeah, I've tried to avoid that. I think I may have had one researcher on that sort of overstepped that boundary a little bit, not necessarily on my show, but in the past on other interviews, I've heard them talk very definitively. And I have a hard time with that. And people, most people do, if you read the comments or you see, people are talking about that person or other people online, they're like, how do you know that? Right? How can you definitively say that for a fact that they do this if you haven't necessarily seen them? Now, again, if you're studying a clan of these things and you interact with them over 10 years and you're documenting and you've got video of them migrating and, that's a whole nother story. But just to come out and definitively say, yeah, they're doing this and I know it for a fact it's dangerous in my opinion. And it doesn't do the community any services as far as I'm concerned.
Well, and another negative part of this is that when somebody does this stuff, there are people that call them out on it. I've got friends that have channels that approach these types of situations and try to clarify to people, you need to look at this with a clear mind here. We need to be able to assess, can you prove, is there proof of this or is this a hypothesis? There's a definitive difference here. And these channels should lay that out pretty good. Nikki's channel, Brent's channel, Steve Cole's channel, there's a lot of them out there that do it pretty well. I think that what hurts here is that when people start calling him out or putting it in chat saying, dude, I don't see that. I don't know that you have the proof of that. And then you have other people who it's almost like you're getting poisoned from each extreme side of it. How do you exist in that healthy middle of trying to be objective and have a clear mind and look at data and say, what's the most plausible explanation for what I'm looking at? And is it safe to assume this, or is that absurd, or things like that? I think there are some times where people present a hypothesis and they're so passionate about it. And they've been working on in this and experiencing it long enough that it's hard for them not to present it as a fact sometimes. I think they make that mistake, probably not trying to deceive people, but just not being, conscious that they're using the certain verbiage that they are sometimes when they're describing things. But
I think you have to be careful even about the difference in a theory and a hypothesis. There's a lot of theories, there's a lot of hypotheses. Those are even mutually exclusive in most cases. So I think you just have to be careful all around. And, back to your point about calling people out online and just calling people out in general, even on the shows that we do, there's a fine line that you have to to walk, and you don't want to just blow people out of the water and destroy them in front of other people. That's nobody's aim in any of this, I don't think. But there is a point where you really have to start asking some of those tough questions. It's happened to me recently when I got back from vacation. I was perusing Facebook, and I saw in some of the, I won't name the person, but somebody that I've had on the show a couple of times is presenting things as evidence. And people are just simply saying, I don't see what you see, dude. It's pareidolia. There's nothing.
Yeah.
And then it just gets into this. Well, if you don't see what I see, then
you see,
get the hell out of my
that's the problem, is when somebody comes in and puts something, whether it's a Facebook group, whether it's in the comments or of a YouTube stream, whether it's in a live chat on a live stream, when people have an issue with something that's being presented, to do it in a respectful way is important. And this is why. This is a great example as to why. Because if you jump on them and stomp them into a mud hole, and people see that as a negative, like, I agree with you, but you're going about this wrong, right? Now what happens is when you go into these groups and somebody puts up a pareidolia type picture or something like that, and you simply make what I would consider to be a fair comment. I don't see what you're saying, or I don't see the detail you're explaining. I don't want to be thrown in or lumped as the guy who was stomping somebody into a mud hole, because it's like, you see that in these Facebook groups a lot. I could get on there and say, dude, I don't know about this picture. Something looks wrong to me. And I'm just sharing fair thoughts here, fair analysis. You'll have 20 people that will call you a bully. You're lucky if you don't get banned from some of the groups for asking a fair question like that, because you're being lumped in with these people who just stomped people into mud holes. And so I just feel like when I really have an issue with something, there's a way to be respectful about it and still project your idea of, or your concern about something,
And what happens a lot of times, Jeff, is people want to be around like-minded people. They want to be in a space where everybody agrees with them. I like a little discourse, right? I like to agree to disagree sometimes, because that's the only way we ever get anything done. If you just see everything that everybody else sees and you don't have the cojones to call somebody out and say, I don't see what you're seeing in the picture. That's just a fair thing to say, and it opens up for discussion. But even a lot of these groups that you join, it'll literally tell you, if you don't believe 100% in everything that happens in this group, you're going to get banned.
Yeah.
And you're going to get ticked.
Or if you question something, it's not
Yeah.
wrong.
And I think
My old channel,
there's a way to do it respectfully, and that should not be a problem in the discourse of discussing Bigfoot or any cryptid, frankly.
Yeah, I agree. Before I joined Untold, my old channel, Pine Island Research, which I still keep around just to have casual chats during the day. I don't really do produce, stream, or show on it. My only rule there is be respectful. I'm fine with arguments. I'm fine with passionate disagreements, but just be respectful about it. I mean, once we get to where, if I think you are completely full of crap and 100% disagree with you passionately, there's still a way to say, this is how I feel about this, without making you feel like I'm calling your mother fat, or, I mean, where is this coming from?
One of the things I've started doing during the interviews when this comes up, I had a really out there interview recently with a guy who made some really out there claims about his own personal experiences with Sasquatch. And I don't know if it's ever going to see the light of day. I really don't know if I'm going to air it or not, because it is that wild, and probably, well, there's no probably, it would be a very controversial episode. But I asked him towards the end of it, and my way to sort of do that and bridge that gap without really saying, I think this is really crazy, is I told him, people are going to listen to this. If it sees the light of day and people hear this interview, there are people who are going to think you're crazy. What is your answer to those people about this hour-long story you just told us? And just let that person talk about it in their own words. And you can do that in a Facebook group as well. I don't see what you're seeing. What are your thoughts on that? Right? People are going to have thoughts. And when you put yourself out there into the world, into the zeitgeist, whether it's on a Facebook post that you've made public, or you go on a show like ours that is going to be heard by tens of thousands of people, you're putting yourself out there. So you got to be ready for the ridicule, because there are going to be people out there who ask questions, and you got to be able to respond to that in a respectful way if it's asked in a respectful way. So, and I think everybody can just do it that way, and we'd get a lot further in the research. But these pareidolia pictures and these definitive statements about Bigfoot with no way to back it up whatsoever as far as evidence is concerned, I think we just go into a circle. It's just an everlasting, perpetual circle that just spins out of control and never takes us anywhere.
I agree. To change the subject, something happened over the weekend here. Well, I shouldn't say the weekend. I think it was the end of the week. We had up here in Minnesota, we had a deputy sheriff, a female young lady, who was laid to rest. She was killed in the line of duty. And it was, her name was Katie Leasing. And she used to be on the sheriff's department in Rapid City, South Dakota, out in the Black Hills with Pennington County. But she was with St. Croix County now. But she was shot in the line of duty, and she was laid to rest over the weekend. And I've seen pictures of that. I would encourage people to look this up. Her name was Katie Leasing, Leising. And it is moving to see how many law enforcement agencies showed up. There are literally over 10,000 people at this funeral, all in uniform. It was really moving to see. But I wanted to mention that, and this is something that in my area was a big thing, because, you get a sheriff. I know if you live in Dade County, Miami, Florida, maybe a law enforcement officer gets shot, and you might hear about it for a day in a clip online somewhere, and then it's over. But up here, this was a really, really big deal. And I know you're former law enforcement, Brian. I'm just kind of curious as to, have you ever attended one of these funerals for a fallen deputy or a law enforcement, where all the neighboring agencies all send people? I mean, it's just crazy how many people were there.
I have never attended one for my own personal reasons, but we lost 2 officers while I was at the city of Atlanta. Well, 3 total while I was in the city of Atlanta. And I talked to people afterwards, and I saw photos and pictures and stuff of them. And it is a really, really impressive sight to see how many people come out and how many jurisdictions were there. Like you said, tens of thousands of people in some cases. And it is something, if people ever get the opportunity, it's a sad thing to do, obviously, but if you ever get a chance to at least check it out online and just see the impressive sight and the solidarity that happens when somebody dies in the line of duty like that. And if you've never done military or law enforcement service, it doesn't really resonate, I don't think, on the same level that it does when it's something that you've experienced yourself. So it's definitely something that, if you get a chance to look at the photos and whatnot, I think it's something that people should definitely check out. But no, I've never done it in person.
Yeah. Well, one thing I'd just like to say is that here at Untold, all of our hearts and prayers are up for going out to Katie Leasing's family, friends, and especially her coworkers and those in law enforcement who worked along beside her. They're probably got a big hole in their heart today, but yeah, no, I agree. I remember, I was requested shortly after I got out of the military when I was a bit younger to escort a body from St. Louis to, Pierre, South Dakota on a flight. And this was, somebody who died in the line of duty in Afghanistan, actually this was in Iraq. And it was right when Iraq was kind of starting, so I'd been out almost 10 years. I mean, it had been a while, but this person was from the 1st of the 502nd, the unit that I served with. And they had an escort to get them to St. Louis, but this is like last minute. This guy was not able to continue that escort on to Pier. And so they looked at who in that state, is this their home state, that may have served in that unit. And they contacted me and asked me if I would go get the Class A's on and do this. And I agreed. But I'll tell you what, boarding a flight and getting off of a flight, when they tell you on that airline, nobody's going to leave their seat yet, we're onboarding the body of specialist so-and-so. It is crazy how moving that is for people. I mean, because this is not a normal part of their life. And these visual reminders, the same as this fallen officer's funeral, to see these pictures, to see these reminders of this person goes to work every day, laying her life on the line to protect and serve us. And we're driving to the mall and whatever, and we don't really consider that sometimes. I think we lose sight or lose focus on that. Now, you as a former law enforcement officer, obviously it's not hard for that to stay in your peripheral, but for those who really aren't connected to that career path, maybe it is something that we take for granted sometimes. So, but I wanted to bring that up. Katie Leasing's family, friends, and coworkers here at Untold, we are thinking of you. And really, that's for all law enforcement officers that lose their life. It's just that this is a big deal up here in our area because Doug and Alex and Blaine, they're from just north of the cities. I'm from northern Minnesota. We've got Dr. Dean Bertram's over in Wisconsin. There's several of us hosts that this was on our radar this week, so to speak. So what else would you like to talk about before we end a show like this? You got anything else on your radar that you've been thinking about, or?
Well, there's just a couple of things. I think we would be remiss if we didn't talk about Legend Meets Science 2. I think that the Kickstarter is winding down for Doug's project.
Yeah.
I think they're at about $32,000 as of this morning. They've got an $80,000 goal set, and that's a big gap that everybody needs to. I said it on the live show that I had Doug on last week before I went on vacation. And at that point, it's even less than it is now. But I said it on that show, if everybody who listens to Sasquatch Odyssey on my channel, the YouTube channel, and through the podcast, in one short week, if everybody gave $1, we could have closed the gap and funded that project fully. So I certainly lay down the gauntlet for everybody who hasn't checked that out. If you head over to Kickstarter, all you got to do is type in Legend Meets Science 2 on Kickstarter. It'll pull right up. There's tons of things for everybody who gives. You become an executive producer of that show, that documentary, and be a part of history. I think it's something that I feel is very important. And there's a ton of people out there who are doing the Kickstarter thing to do documentaries and other things. And I highly urge everybody to go check that out and become part of history and help support that project and help fund it, because without the Kickstarter, I don't think it's going to get done, honestly. Doug and I talked about that on the show. So I think it's very important for people to get involved on the ground level and really support something that Doug's really been working on for 23 years. So,
yeah. And there's so many different levels of support that you can come in at. But one of the things that I've kind of been throwing out there, the reasoning behind this of why you should support it is, one of the entry levels that you can donate at is like $30, and you get part 1 and part 2 of Legend Meets Science for that donation. Well, if you wanted to eventually watch the Legend Meets Science 2 documentary, the way that it's being done, if you wanted to buy the DVD or order that's about what you would pay anyway. So really, you're just paying the $30 to pre-order it. In order to fund it actually getting done. So it's like just paying in advance for something and then you're going to get it for free when it comes out. It seems like a great idea to do. So
Very good point.
But yeah, there's a lot of Doug's publishing company, Hangar One. A lot of the author, my book just came out on Hangar One here a couple of weeks ago, but all the different authors that write under Hangar One, almost all of them, donated the digital copies of their book to be part of this Kickstarter program. So when you go in and let's say you give $90, and with that you get like 10 different books. I don't have it in front of me, but you can get the whole library of the whole author's books for a certain donation. There's one where you can get 6 different books for a certain donation. It's a great way if you like to read and you enjoy this subject. What you're getting, kind of the incentive that you're getting to donate is a great incentive, because you're definitely going to get all of that back in the enjoyment of reading all these different authors. So, but anything else?
I think that's it. That's everything that was on my list.
I recently was on, we filmed we filmed an episode on your show, and I'd been on it before. This was kind of a follow-up to that. I didn't really pay attention over the weekend. Has that yet to be released on your channel, or?
That's a very good question, Jeff.
I don't think it's out yet, but I don't want to say that and then find out that it is, and I missed
Everybody
it.
tune in. Everybody go check it out and just see if it's there. And if it's not, it'll be out in the next. I know I'm going to put Doug's episode out talking about the new project probably tomorrow. So if you haven't heard Jeff's, it will be out in the next week or two.
Have you heard I know when they originally put the Kickstarter up for Legend Meets Science 2, they put 30 days for the duration of it. And I thought, man, that's pretty aggressive, right? I mean, they're trying to raise $80,000 in 30 days. A lot of that was because there's so much of this ready to get slammed right into the production studios. This stuff it's sitting here waiting to push the door down to get this done. So they were trying to be pretty quick about how quickly they could raise it to get it done by hopefully the end of the year. Would have been awesome. Are they going to extend that? Do you know, or did Doug mention anything about that? I haven't asked him, so
no,
I don't know.
We didn't talk about it on the show, and I did a Kickstarter, God, about 10 years ago for an album project I was working on at the time. And I don't know if you can, once you lock.
Yeah, I don't know.
I don't think they're able to extend it. So they would have to do a second round, because if you aren't, there's probably people who are going to listen to this who aren't familiar with Kickstarter. Just quickly, the only way that Kickstarter, those projects get funded is if you meet or exceed your original, for this, it's 80 grand. So if they don't meet that 80 grand, nobody who's pledged gets charged, and it just goes away. It falls into the wayside, the abyss of failed Kickstarters, and they would have to restart the entire program over again with either the same goal, a different goal, extended goal, or whatever the case may be as far as the time. Yeah. So I think I looked at it this morning, and as I looked at it an hour or so ago before we went on, and it had about 55 hours left. So a little over 2 days, basically 2.5 days or so, to get it funded. And I said they were about $32,000 when I checked it out. So,
yeah, it's an interesting point. I mean, if you could just get on and $10, I mean, you spend $10 at the Burger King drive-thru one day. So, I mean, if enough people did it, and it wouldn't take that many when you start doing the math and you see how many people are in this community, how many people subscribe to some of these large channels. It's just getting the word out. That's really all it is making people aware of it. So
definitely.
But yeah, no, I tell you what, Brian, I appreciate you joining us this morning. As usual, it is always fun to have an episode with you on and talk about different things. And you got anything coming up as far as are you doing any speaking engagements or anything like that this summer?
I am actually. I will be at the Marion Bigfoot Festival here in Marion, North Carolina on the 20th. And I think the only thing that I'm doing as far as that's booked now is I will be on the stage handling the on-stage portion of the encounters portion of the Smoky Mountain Bigfoot Conference coming up in July. I think it's July 22nd or 23rd. Cliff Brackman will be there. Matt Moneymaker, Renee Holland's going to be there. And they've got a couple other speakers that they've added. And I think they may add a couple of more. So if you guys are ever in the area and are able to attend that conference, I think it was about 6,000 people there last year, and they're expecting it to be even bigger. It's one of the best conferences that I've frankly ever been to. So up in Gatlinburg, and it's a touristy town. There's tons of things to do outside.
I love Gatlinburg, man.
Yeah.
I remember when I first went into the military, when I was in Georgia, somebody said, "Do you want to go skiing?" And it was winter. And I said, "Yeah, but where are we going to go skiing? We're in Georgia." And they're like, "Well, let's go up to Gatlinburg." I'm like, "They ski in Tennessee?" And he's like, "Yeah, let's go up there." It blew me away. It blew me away that. And when we drove up the mountain and was looking at everything, I just thought, man, this is a beautiful place.
Yeah, it's definitely one of the coolest places. If you're into the touristy thing, it gets pretty touristy during the summertime, but
yeah,
you can't beat it I think the tickets are like $25 for the general admission for the conference, and it's always a ton of fun. We'll be there. We have a vendor table set up. I've got most of the guys from my network are going to be there, so it should be a good time.
Nice. I will say also with the Kickstarter for Legend Meets Science 2, I will post that in the comments of this video so that will be there. Also, anybody who's listening on podcast, if you'd like to support it, you can pop onto YouTube and look up Untold Radio Network and see the link in the comments. There's also some other videos that we've put up promoting the Kickstarter campaign. But also on Facebook, you can look up Untold Radio Network on Facebook. You can look up my channel, Pine Island Research, on Facebook. You can look up Doug Hychek on Facebook. I mean, we've got the link available quite a few different places. But if you're listening on podcasts, that's the only bad thing about those who are listening in their car. We love having you here, but it's just we don't have that opportunity to mentally click that link, right? So, I mean, if you just take a moment once you get to work or get home and pop on either YouTube at the Untold Radio Network or look up Untold Radio Network on Facebook, you'll find the link to the Kickstarter program. So, but I will put it in the comments here of this video as soon as we're done. So thank you so much, Brian. Appreciate having you here. I had all of our hosts on one time, and now I'm kind of cycling through that second time. And so it won't be long, and I'll probably give you a call and see if you want to join us again.
I'm always willing, man. It's always a blast to talk to you.
All right. Well, thanks so much. We'll talk to you later on. And for the rest of you, I hope you have a great rest of your Monday and the rest of your week. I have my show tonight, Pine Island Research, 9 p.m. Eastern time here on the Untold Radio Network channel. It'll be a good show. We've got anybody who listened to the show last week, my guess, we were talking about some experience that they were having up in the Pacific Northwest. He said, you got to get on this other guy because he has had a couple encounters. He knows a whole lot about those who have had encounters in this area. They all have kind of shared them with him. That's who I've got on tonight. And so it's going to be a great show. I think you'll like it. 9 p.m. Eastern on Pine Island Research here at Untold Radio Network. Other than that, you guys buckle your seatbelts, have a great rest of your week, and we will see you later on.